What's up, everybody? Episode 9 of the Slip and Weave podcast and episode 3 live from Coronaville. Let's fucking get it. Another week of life in complete fucking chaos. No news in the boxing world because there's really no news other than the coronavirus, which is still fucking front and center of everything. But in taking some time to think about, what's worth talking about in the sport of boxing, in an effort to keep it current, I figured I'd take you through my personal top 10 pound-for-pound fighters today. I know every publication has their pound-for-pound list, and, everyone's criteria is a little bit different. But I think the criteria that I'm using as I put this list together is obviously skill level, but the other two that I think are really kind of a bigger factor for me are longevity and quality of opposition. So I put together kind of like a top, 20 to give myself a little perspective on, I don't want to leave anybody out or whatever. Oh, I have this person higher than this person. So I think this is like the best version of a pound for pound list that I could come up with. So yeah, let's get right into it, man. At number 10, I have Mikey Garcia. Mikey Garcia is one of my favorite fighters to watch. He's a very, very complete guy. If you look at Mikey Garcia's technique, it's almost out of a textbook. Or an instructional video. It's like everything he does is perfectly executed almost. He's been a champion from 126 now all the way up to 140. He does not yet have a belt at 147 if I'm not mistaken. No, he does not. I'm looking at his box rack right now. And I remember I saw Mikey Garcia for the first time about 10 years ago. I knew there was just something different about him. The way he was able to react to punches, his timing, he could go forward, he could be on the back foot, he could outbox you, he could outslug you. There was very little that you could do to kind of get to Mikey Garcia. I remember back in 2013, I went to see his fight with Orlando Salido, which was where I actually saw some other great fighters on that undercard as well, including Golovkin and some others. And I remember that was a great fight. He has wins over Juan Manuel Lopez, Rocky Martinez. He had the 2-year hiatus with his promotional issues with Top Rank. And you got to give it to Mikey for, staying his own boss, not succumbing to a major promotional network. It's one of my favorite things about Mikey is his ability to stay a free agent and his network and promotional mobility. He's in my opinion, one of the smartest businessmen in all of boxing. So when he came back, he fought Elio Rojas, got a great knockout. He now has wins over Adrian Broner, Sergey Lipinets, Robert Easter. And then about a year ago, he fought Errol Spence Jr. He moved up to welterweight and fought the best guy he could find at welterweight and bit off a little more than he could chew. And pretty much just got outworked the whole fight. His style, sometimes he's a little like the transition from defense to offense isn't always there. So he'll sort of, it's sort of a you go, I go. And if somebody's tall and busy, sometimes Mikey keeps his hands in his pocket. And that's what happened for 12 rounds. He came back his last fight, beat a really solid fighter in Jesse Vargas, and I think he made the statement that I'm a real welterweight, I can hurt a real welterweight, and that he's a problem for anybody. So number 10 for me is Mikey Garcia. Number 9 is Anthony Joshua. One of the most charismatic heavyweights of the post-Klitschko era, I would say he's probably the most charismatic heavyweight outside of Tyson Fury in the post-heavyweight era. When you look at Anthony Joshua's career, it's sort of always been on this trajectory of greatness, at least in a public perception way. He's always been like, if you envisioned, kind of the perfect heavyweight champion in your head, you'd think up Anthony Joshua, 6'6", 250, great hand speed, great power, nice solid jab from the outside, decent defensive mobility. He's a little robotic for me sometimes, but he definitely has a way of thinking his way through the fight and being effective. He gets clipped and he gets hurt in a lot of these fights, but he is one of those guys where he just knows how to adjust mid-fight. Even if you don't really like watching it, he always knows how to adjust mid-fight. And I think if you look at kind of the big three of heavyweights, right? Him, Fury, and Deontay Wilder, he's probably got the most quality wins. Not saying the most high quality, but he has the highest volume of quality wins. You look at the top 20 at heavyweight, there's a lot of guys that he's covered, man. You look at Dillian White, who is the WBC mandatory and is, sort of universally considered like the next man up. Beat him back in 2015, beat Charles Martin. A lot of people didn't think Charles Martin was all that, but he's been able to win a bunch of fights recently, and it looks like he's back in line for a title. So I think that win looks better and better every day. Some other wins in there, but of course the huge one in 2017, I think where we all sort of realized how special Anthony Joshua is, was his fight with Vladimir Klitschko in 2017, where they both dropped each other. It was very high tension, and Klitschko really brought his A game as much as he had left. I think that he brought the best of what he had left that night, and really wanted to fight Joshua. He really wanted to. I think after the Fury fight, which was just so ugly and low impact, and it was like every round Klitschko just sort of let it slip away. You could see like he really wanted to fight AJ. And when he dropped AJ and almost had him out, I think it was the 7th, 8th round, I thought he was going to finish him. And AJ pulled himself together, came back and stopped Klitschko in the 11th round. Pretty shitty stoppage, but definitely a very, very high quality win. And you look at his last 4 fights, Joseph Parker in March of 2018, Alexander Povetkin in September of 2018, and then these 2 fights with Andy Ruiz that he's had. Obviously getting upset by Ruiz in the first one, but really adjusting tactically, making it exclusively an outside technical fight, and sort of coasting to an easy decision in the rematch. So Anthony Joshua is one of the best heavyweights of his time. He's in some ways overrated and in some ways extremely underrated. I think he's overrated as far as I don't think he's an all-time great heavyweight, and I don't think he's like the greatest British heavyweight of all time even, and I think he gets that kind of hype, but I don't think people give him credit for how much heart and balls he has, his ability to adjust mid-fight. Those are very, very special qualities that even guys with more talent than him don't have. They're not able to do that. So number 9 is Anthony Joshua for me. Number 8, I'm going to go with Triple G, man. Gennady Golovkin. One of the most exciting, explosive punchers of his time. I was talking about the Mikey Garcia Orlando Salido fight before. Triple G was on the undercard of that fight. And that may have even been the first time that I saw him. If at most it was the second time I saw him. And he fought Gabriel Rosado. And, Rosado, with being from Philly, we were at the Garden, at the theater in the Garden. And it was a pretty Rosado crowd. Obviously, him being American and being from, 60, 70 miles away from the city. There's a lot of Rosado people there. We were kind of sitting with him, me and my dad. And I remember thinking, man, I don't know that you it's so rare that you see guys that punch like this guy, and do it with a level of precision, and defensive responsibility. He's never out of place. He's always perfectly balanced. His feet are always set, ready to punch, ready to throw something hard. And I think one of the things that he maybe suffered from was that in his prime, it was very, very difficult to get any top guys in the ring with him. And once the Canelo fight was sort of in the vernacular, I remember people were talking about Canelo and Golovkin fighting. I want to say like at the end of 2015. And they didn't wind up actually fighting until the middle of 2017. In that time, he's got some good wins, man. He beat David Lemieux. He beat Kell Brook. And then I was actually at his fight with Danny Jacobs. That was a very, very good fight. Very close fight. It was the first time I think we ever saw Golovkin even really challenged, let alone pushed to the limit, which is kind of what Danny Jacobs did. Obviously, him being a great fighter. And then you look at his two fights with Canelo. The first one was a draw. And I remember at the time I felt like that was not a good decision and that Golovkin won that fight. But I've since gone back and watched it, and I actually think that it was the right decision. I think a draw is 100% suitable for that fight. The reason being, I think the untold story of that fight, if you really watch very closely, is Canelo's defense. Triple G spends so much of that first fight missing punches. And if you're sort of caught up in the tension of the moment, he'll throw a flurry. Maybe you feel like they're landing, or maybe you feel like, oh, Canelo's slowing down. But he really spends the whole fight making Golovkin miss the vast majority of what he's throwing. And so, of course, Golovkin's activity, he wins some rounds. He still lands some big shots. But Canelo's landing the cleaner shots, and his defense is just unbelievable in that first fight. And then in the rematch, I thought a draw would have been appropriate in that fight. That fight was kind of like, these guys are fucking made for each other, man. This has fucking, trilogy written all over it. And apparently that's going to happen once, if and when the world goes back to normal. Those guys are apparently going to fight again. What weight they fight at, I don't know, but I can't wait to see it. His most recent fight, he beat a very, very tough guy from Brooklyn named Sergey Derevyachenko. And it was a very close fight. He edged the decision. I thought he edged it too. I thought he did just enough, especially with the knockdown, to sort of slide out with a win, barely. But I think Derevyachenko really kind of pushed him, within an inch of, himself. I think he was really exhausted by the end of the fight. It was a very physical fight. But this is a guy who, at least for the last 5 years, has pretty much exclusively fought at the very highest level. And I wish maybe that had been shifted back 2 or 3 years and he could have been able to do it a little earlier. But he's had a great career, and he's one of my favorite fighters to watch. Number 7, I have Alexander Usyk, the Ukrainian former undisputed cruiserweight champion, who is now, I think he's the mandatory for one of Anthony Joshua's belts at heavyweight. This guy right here is a fucking machine. It's a little freaky to watch him. Like the first 2 rounds, he's almost not engaged in the fight. He'll sort of just like watch you, get a look at what you're doing, He's kind of like eyeing you. Maybe he'll smile a little bit. It's weird because he'll appear very passive to start, but there's like this sick fuck underneath it, like waiting to catch your mistake or whatever. And then as the fight progresses, it's just sort of this slow boil, and then before you know it, he's just pounding on you. And I remember seeing him. I saw him fight a guy named Kurzastov Glovacki, who was a champion at the time. And I remember Usyk completely dominated him. Then got into the World Boxing Super Series. But I forgot he beat Michael Hunter before that. Michael Hunter is now a heavyweight contender as well. And then in this Super Series, he was beating Marco Huck, Mairis Briedis, and then I think his name is Murat Gassiev. These are all the top cruiserweights in the world, and he beat them all relatively easily, with the exception of Bradis. And then the fight that I always think of when I think of Usyk is his fight with Tony Bellew, which was really kind of a 50-50 fight. And then out of nowhere, man, Usyk just put him to sleep. Absolutely put him to sleep. It was incredible to watch. This past year in October, after that he took a year off. I think he had either a shoulder or a knee injury. And so he's moved up to heavyweight. He's fought Chaz Witherspoon, and he has a fight signed against Derek Chisora for late May. Again, who fucking knows if any of that's going to happen? It's so hard to know what fights are going to happen when right now, or if any fights are going to happen this year. But I love that matchup, Usyk and Chisora. Chisora is sort of like the ultimate road warrior of boxing right now, especially for heavyweights. He's fought them all. He's a tough son of a bitch, and if Usyk can beat him, I think it's a pretty good gauge on what level of fighter he is. So, Alexander Usyk, man, go check him out. Number 6, I have the very, very legendary icon, Manny Pacquiao. Not a lot you have to say about Manny Pacquiao. He's sort of a once-in-a-generation fighter, 8-division world champion. You know, every time the guy gets knocked down, he gets right back up. And literally, he's literally been knocked out cold and come back and made himself relevant. 8-division world champion, Manny Pacquiao was kind of like, outside of Floyd Mayweather, was the guy when I was just getting into boxing. I remember actually the first fight that I saw him in was his first fight with Eric Morales. I might have even gotten it on DVD back then, online. I think I did. And that fight was just such a war. Actually, that fight was one of the fights that really solidified my fanhood for me personally, was Pacquiao Morales 1. Even though he lost that fight, it was such an incredible fight. And then watching all 4 of his fights with Marquez, that's one of the all-time great rivalries. If you're bored in Coronaville right now, go watch all 4 of the Manny Pacquiao versus Juan Manuel Marquez fights. Definitely worth your time. Marquez being one of the fucking all-time great fighters, and maybe the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. I know that's a stretch, but it was such a tremendous series where these two guys, they were, contemporaries fighting each other in their primes 4 different times. It's so rare on a business level, that guys can come to terms that many times. And then after losing to Morales, being able to beat him twice, 2 wins over Marco Antonio Barrera, another one of the all-time great Mexican fighters. And then, by the time he beat all those guys at, coming up to 130 or whatever, he had already won in 5-6 weight classes. And then you look at the second half of his career, his welterweight, junior middleweight career. I'm literally just reading names right now. Oscar De La Hoya, Ricky Hatton, Miguel Cotto, Josh Clottey, Antonio Margarito, Shane Mosley, Marquez again, the horrible decision to Tim Bradley, and then getting knocked out by Marquez, coming back, beating Brandon Rios, beating Tim Bradley, fighting Floyd Mayweather and losing that fight, coming back again, beating Tim Bradley again, beating Jesse Vargas. I could just literally read down his resume and it would blow your mind. But his last 3 fights, after another loss to Jeff Horn, Lucas Matisse, Adrian Broner, and then Keith Thurman in his last fight, which to me is like maybe the most impressive win in his career, as far if you look at, the context of the moment and when he's fighting Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman's 10 years younger than him. He's 30. Pacquiao's 40, and has way, way less miles on him. And it was a brutal fight. So it's very rare that the older fighter is able to win a close and brutal physical fight. But that's the level that of a fighter Manny Pacquiao is. For me, I'd even have him higher had he not lost some fights in recent years. Losing to Jeff Horn, and I know there's been some bad decisions in there, and a couple of years ago, I probably would have had him number 1 after Mayweather retired. But I feel like number 6 is perfectly appropriate for where he's at right now. The fact that he's even in the top 10 pound for pound on a lot of people's lists, I think just speaks to his career, his legacy. 41 years old, still one of the best fighters on planet Earth. Number 5, I have Errol Spence Jr., who recently was in a horrible car accident. We don't really know what the status of his health is. I guess he's working out and training and all that, but that's a little different than actually being in the ring and doing full contact and how your reaction time is. It's all very different, but assuming that he's going to come back and he's going to be whole, he's going to be the fighter that we've all watched. He's a very, very special talent, man. The first time I saw him was I believe it was against Chris Algieri. And he completely dominated Algieri. I hadn't really seen Algieri get dominated like that before. And it was just a clear indicator that this guy's different. This guy's a different level. And then in the last 3 years, you look at his resume: Kell Brook, Lamont Peterson, Mikey Garcia, and Sean Porter. It's 4 top level guys. And you can just see when this guy fights how long and calculated, especially Mikey. He kept it long, and he kept it smart. He kept it boxing. His defense and his head movement get better every time I see him. But the problem is we can't all get the fights that we want to see. We can't get him and Crawford and him and Pacquiao together for whatever reason. So I'm hoping that whenever he gets healthy that, those are the fights he wants and those are the fights that his promotional team is willing to make. It almost feels weird putting him this high on the list because it's not that Mikey Garcia and Sean Porter aren't great fighters, but his resume relative to all the guys around him is a little bit thinner. I just think his talent is special enough that number 5 is kind of the right spot for him. So hopefully we get to see him and Crawford or him and Pacquiao sooner than later. Number 4, I have Terrence Crawford. Now I know there's a lot of publications that have him number 1 or number 2, or that just generally have him higher. I think it's very possible that he is the most naturally gifted athlete in boxing. That's very possible. But in the same way that I couldn't put Spence any higher, I don't think I could put him any higher. I mean, his resume is actually, in my opinion, the thinnest of anybody on this whole list. Outside of his wins over Victor Postol and Amir Khan and maybe his last one, there's not a lot of wins on there that really grab my attention. And the other thing, too, there's not a lot of fights on his resume that give me me personally, my opinion, a real gauge on where he's at. There's nobody in the top 10 at welterweight on BoxRec that he's fought other than Amir Khan. And Amir Khan's ranked number 11 anyway. So there's nobody in the top 10 at welterweight that he's fought. So it's hard for me to put him any higher than number 4, but you look at how he's beating these guys, which I think is more so how people are gauging his talent, is how he's beating these guys. A lot of the same way, Golovkin had that problem in his early 30s, where it was like you're sort of gauging how great he is based on how he's beating these guys and not necessarily who he's beating. Because it's not like he's fighting bums. I'm not saying he's fighting bums. but it's hard to put somebody who hasn't fought anyone in the top 10 of their division, even in the top 10 pound for pound. So that's how special I think he is. I think he's so special that he hasn't fought any elite fighter at his weight class, and I still think he's one of the best fighters in the world. He can do it all. He can fight, nasty on the inside and mix it up. He could box real classy from the outside. His feet, he's got feet like Bernard Hopkins, man. It's like jazz, man. He just sort of glides around the ring. He's beautiful to watch, man, and I hope that when it all settles down, that he can really. What I think he should do, he should try to get a fight with Mikey Garcia, because Mikey Garcia is sort of promotionally the most flexible of all these guys. He just beat Jesse Vargas. It's obvious that Bob Arum and Eddie Hearn are willing to do deals together. So it's probably the most practical of all of his realistic options. And so I think he should pursue that fight. Obviously, the fights we want are Spence, Pacquiao, Sean Porter, if we can get it, Danny Garcia. But Mikey looks like that's a fight that could get made real easy, and he would want it. He would want the fight. It wouldn't be a hard fight to make. Number 3, I have the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury. This guy, man, this last fight of his with Wilder, I did a whole episode about it because it blew my fucking mind, and I thought about it for almost 3 weeks. He took the biggest puncher in boxing and reduced him to backing up and trying to protect himself. It was a brilliant performance. This is a guy who's 6'9", 270 when he's fit, and is almost impossible to hit clean in the face. Hard to nail him down. If he wants to, he can just walk to you and kick the shit out of you the way he did with Wilder the first fight, or he can stay on the back foot, box real nice, keep it defensive, keep it slick, keep it pretty the way he did with Wilder in the first fight. I actually didn't see him fight until the Klitschko fight, which was a fucking boring, ugly fight, but he was very effective at shutting Klitschko's jab down and shutting basically his whole offense down as a result. He's got Mayweather-level boxing IQ, I think. Just the way he's able to figure these guys out and make them kind of look normal. Even Wilder in the first fight, he slowed that pace down to where, with the exception of getting dropped, the whole fight was Deontay Wilder missing punches. And I think it completely fucked him up in the head. I think he was tired. And then once he caught him in the 12th round, it's like, oh, I got him. I think he really started to believe that if he just does what he does, that he'd catch him in the rematch. Fury says, nah, I'm going to step to you. I'm going to body you now. I'm gonna put my fucking flesh on you and move you. Which is a whole different approach than the first fight. The whole first fight was at an arm's length, de-impacting the fight. So between those 2 fights and the Klitschko fight alone, and then 2 fights with Derek Chisora, for me, man, this is the best heavyweight in the world, and this is, one of the most exciting fighters of his era, and it's must-see television when Tyson Fury is on. His fight with Otto Wallin, too, the one right before Wilder, where he has this massive cut on his eye against somebody that none of us have heard of. And again, he turns it into a brawl because it needs to be, because he needs to get close, where the eyesight is less of a factor. And he just bodied this guy around and beat him up. So the resilience, fighting the very best of his era for the last couple of, at least since the last 6 years. This is definitely one of the top guys in boxing, Tyson Fury. Number 2, I have perhaps the greatest amateur fighter ever, Vasily Lomachenko. 14-1 with 10 knockouts. Typically somebody with 15 fights wouldn't be the number 2 guy pound for pound, but this is somebody who has been a world champion since their 3rd professional fight. And their 2nd professional fight was a loss. He lost to Orlando Salido, gritty, grimy veteran, throwing low blows, throwing stuff in the clinches, doing stuff that you don't necessarily see in amateur boxing. So he gets this crash course on professional boxing and almost wins the fight anyway. And then goes on and beats Gary Russell, moves up to 130, beats Nicholas Walters, beats Rigondeaux. I was at his fight against Jorge Linares, and those two guys are probably my favorite fighters to watch right now. And the technical proficiency between the two of them was just like the speed, everything both of them were doing was like perfect. And he gets dropped, pops right back up, stops Linares with a body shot in the 10th round. With him, and of course he's got, his last fight with Luke Campbell was incredible. Luke Campbell's such a tough opponent. Lomachenko, it's like, I really want to see him in with some of these young guys now, man. There's this crop of young guys, Gervonta Davis, Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez. I want to see him fight these guys, man. I like this group of guys, and I think he will fight them. But this guy right here is an absolute machine offensively. He's like right in the pocket making you miss. Right in the pocket making you miss and just kind of testing you out for a couple rounds. And then he just sort of starts like feeling you out with that front hand. And then he's just opening up. And then before you know it, it's like you can't make a move without him being up your ass. And you're in the 5th round completely gassed. And I think what's crazy about him is he makes all these guys quit. He made Nicholas Walters quit. He made Rigondeaux quit. He made Linares quit from that body shot, man. He makes top level guys quit. He makes them say, I'm good, man. I'm all set on this shit right here. I don't need this shit. So Lomachenko for me is number 2, and he is a very, very special fighter. I think we're going to see in the next couple of years just how special he is when he starts fighting these young guys, because now he's the guy. But I definitely think right now, between how quickly he's done it, being a 3-division champion in 6 years and 15 fights, that's a condensed career and then being as an amateur like 395-1. This is one of the best guys of his generation for sure. And then for me, my number 1 pound for pound guy in the world is the great Saul Canelo Alvarez. This guy right here, man, he is a very, very special guy who continues to evolve, continues to grow his game, continues to improve. Every time you see him, he's like adding layers to himself, particularly since his fight with Mayweather. Every time you fucking see this guy, he's better. He's always better. His head movement has gotten to the point now where it's probably the best in the game. Just his pure sort of upper body movement making you miss a punch, altogether. You're not even catching glove or elbow or anything. He'll just make you miss and make you look silly. And you look at his resume, the list of guys he's fought is stupid, but going back to Austin Trout before the Mayweather fight, Trout being undefeated, then fighting Floyd, fighting Lara, fighting Cotto, the 2 fights with Triple G, Danny Jacobs, and then this most recent fight with Sergey Kovalev where, he decides he's going to move up 2 weight classes, fight one of the 3 or 4 best light heavyweights in the world, and definitely the most well-known light heavyweight in the world. Massive puncher, Sergey Kovalev, and knocks him out in a 50-50 fight out of nowhere in the 11th round. I thought him fighting Kovalev it's not the same, but it's a similar situation to Mikey moving up 2 weight classes to fight Errol Spence. It's like these fights can sometimes go either way. You never know how a move up, particularly a move up that big, is going to impact a fighter or a strategy. And he just takes his time. There's no extra movements. There's no wasted punches. He lands everything so clean and crisp. And to me, he's the number 1 star in boxing. You look at that, he's 29 years old. His record is 53-1-2 with 36 knockouts. It's rare that you see guys have that many fights in a whole career, let alone before the age of 30, going pro at 15 years old and not fighting gimmies on the way up, man. really fighting tough fights his whole come up. So the come up is as real as it gets, and then every opportunity he's had to prove himself, he sort of stepped up to the plate. Even after losing to Mayweather, you know, somebody like Victor Ortiz, it makes them crumble, but somebody like Canelo Alvarez, it makes them better. It makes them, you know, it's very obvious that he took notes like, what is this guy doing that's so effective? Well, it's hard to be effective if you can't hit somebody. So he sort of added that to his game where now, you know, he's so hard to hit. I think guys come out and they think they're going to have a brawl, and then they miss 6 punches in a row. And it just kind of makes them rethink everything they're going to do. And then on top of that, he's got elite level one-punch knockout power. That shit can come out of nowhere at any moment. Any moment. So Canelo Alvarez is for me, my number one pound for pound guy. And that right there is your slip and weave, top 10 pound for pound. Thanks for listening again, you guys. I really appreciate it every week. And I'll catch you next Friday as always. Be safe out there.